Go. We're
Yep.
live. All right, so we are Donovan Cole and Chris Eblin, and we had the misfortune of choosing 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Indeed.
Now, Donovan, what's your opinion on the movie?
Um, I would, if I were to rate it, I'd give it a 2 out of 5. That's being generous, to be honest. Uh, it's
Yeah,
it's very very slow. So, especially think all the younger folks would not like this movie whatsoever. Dialogue is not introduced until like the first 27 minutes of the film. After you just see a whole bunch of monkeys doing monkey things, you know. Uh,
I
yeah,
do now. I have to say, my personal rating, I'd go somewhere around a 3 out of 10. I like my movies with some dialogue, movies that make you think. And while this movie certainly does make you think, or maybe it made the people who were alive in whatever it was, 1967, think, I feel that this movie was just way too slow paced for my TikTok attention span to keep up.
yeah, and I would say I don't have a TikTok attention span, but still, like 30 minutes and nothing happens except you see like a barren world and then monkeys, and then there's the big black rod.
Oh yeah, speaking of which, let's go through like from the beginning. So in the beginning we start off with the dawn of man and a whole bunch of planet scenery, right?
Hmm.
And then we come across the monkeys. And do you remember what the monkeys were fighting over?
Water.
Yeah, they were fighting over their brown little puddle over there. And then the second group of monkeys, they come up. They run up and they're like, "Hey, get out of town, fool! This our block." And pull out the strap, right?
Hmm.
What was the strap?
It was a bone because after the one monkey gang had touched the black rod, it's not explained, but they found out how to use bones for tools. And so the one monkey picked up, I don't know what kind of bone it was, but then he started smashing the rest of the bones with the one thick bone used as a weapon. And then he just beat the heck out of the one monkey that was that was, drinking from the water puddle, brown
Yeah,
water puddle.
I
And
remember.
then, yeah,
And then
then
the
it,
monkeys like
yeah,
they toss the bone up in the air, and it's the worst transition known to man.
yeah, and then there's the ship in space.
Yeah. And then after the ship, we get like more long scenes with music, and the music's not too bad. It's pretty iconic. But at the same
Hmm.
time, if I'm just watching like a Ferris wheel go around in space, it's pretty boring.
Yeah, not much action in this film at all.
Yeah. It's like Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer's a good movie where people just sit down and talk a lot. This movie is just like a boring Oppenheimer.
Uh, I guess I can see where you're coming from on there.
Yeah? And then what happens next? What do you think?
We get introduced to the main character. Uh, he's some doctor scientist guy. I forget his
He's
name.
so boring we can't even remember his name.
Anyways, he's the like lone freaking guy on the ship that's heading to this station, and then he like has like a discussion with the people there because regarding like why he's there because he has like a mission on some moon base because there's some problems, and they're like, oh, uh, what if it comes to us? And he's like, I can't disclose that information. Big boy, Daddy America won't let me.
Yeah, and
Classified.
that's a recurring theme in the movie is secrecy. So when we get into talking about Hal later, I'll bring it up again. But the secrecy, it's very interesting how they lead onto it in the beginning with the captain saying I can't tell you that. I personally think it's dumb, but that's just because I would probably throw hands with the captain over that if I was on his ship and he wouldn't tell me about it. So, I think that choice is stupid, but the movie continues.
Yeah. So then he gets on a. Does he get back on like a lone ship again to like meet up with some other astronauts or something?
Yeah, he gets on this lander and then he goes down to this conference.
Yeah, and then he has a conference with all the astronaut guys, and then they meet up at a different big black rod that's on the moon, and then
And one guy
they're gonna.
absolutely like geeks touching it, right?
Yeah, he's like caressing the rod just like the monkeys, his ancestors, if you will. And then they're gonna like take a picture, and then a loud ringing sounds, and it's like you're, oh man, it's pretty loud. And then it
Yeah.
just cuts. Did it say like a certain amount of years later or something? And then they're like on a ship, him and like some of the astronauts there,
Mm.
like heading to the signal that was being like broadcasted through the black thing to Jupiter. So now they're heading on a mission to Jupiter, and it's very funky looking spaceship. Yeah, you take from there, man.
Yeah, that funky looking spaceship. It's like the super long one with the weird head.
Yeah.
Yeah, so an interesting part about this movie that I thought was interesting at least is the fact that they live mostly normal lives. They kind of eat their food. It's not like zero gravity. They eat their food on like plates. And I think that's because of the circular like artificial gravity stuff. So I think it's pretty cool that they were able to simulate that kind of stuff in a studio in the 1960s. Then we get like a scene of the cryogenic pods, people sleeping. And then we get introduced to maybe one of the most boring villains of all time, because he was one-upped by the guy in Wall-E. I forget his name. Oh no, his name is Otto. We get introduced to Hal, which stands
Yeah.
for something that I don't remember. Do you
Mhm.
remember it?
I do not.
Oh, okay. Well, he's basically just a glowing orb that controls everything. So he's like Big Brother. Except,
Yeah, every part of the ship.
yeah, he's just ominous.
Mhm.
And then what happens, they're just kind of traveling through space, they're chilling, and then one of the scanners or one of the satellites gets like a malfunction. And so the crewmate, red guy, jettisons himself out of the ship and goes to go fix it, but it's fine. And by the way, the scene where like he's in the orb and he shoots himself out into space and then he just like space jumps from his little
Pod.
repair
Yeah.
pod onto the ship. That's just so stupid. I mean, I'm, there's nothing scarier than getting lost in the vacuum of space and just drifting away forever. And this guy's just like free soloing that. I would never do that.
Yeah, me either. Like, there's no tethers ever used, and then later we see after they have like their own like private discussion inside one of the pods, and for whatever reason, when they like turned off the communications in the pod, so Hal wouldn't hear them, but they turned the ship around to see if he could like hear them,
Yeah.
but Hal could like see their mouths moving through the glass, and he's like a supercomputer, so he knows everything they're talking about, and decides to betray them. So when the one guy decides to put the thing on the satellite that wasn't incorrect in the first place, they had replaced it. So either way, it was fine. But for whatever reason, they wanted to put the old one back on because there's nothing wrong with it, even though they just fixed it.
Yeah.
And so the one guy ends up getting murked by Hal. And you just see this by the guy. Oh, wait, this guy doesn't have a tether. I wonder why. Because they decide not to use any for whatever
Because they're
reason.
idiots and they base jumped in space.
Yeah, anyways, you just see the one guy sees his friend just flying through space and is like, oxygen is going off. And so he gets in the pod to like get him. And then he like tries to go back to the ship, but Hal won't let him in. He's like, Hal, let me in. He's like, no. And then
Yeah.
have a little banter back and forth. So then he ends up finding an like emergency hatch that he's able to access. He gets inside the ship, and then I think Hal like activated the airlock that he was in.
Yeah,
And for
you're
whatever
right.
reason, he wasn't wearing his helmet. He decided to just go in the pod, even though the suit and the helmets are in the same room. He decided not to put on the helmet when he go to get his friend.
Which is crazy, by the way. Imagine training for your entire life to be an astronaut. Something bad happens, and the one person on your ship who's trying to kill you and can control the airlocks, the only thing that is keeping you safe, and like you just decide, nah, I'll just raw dog it. I don't need a helmet. It's so dumb. But anyway, so at this point in the story, he's back in the ship. He just survived the airlock, and now he's set on his goals. He's gonna go turn off Hal, right?
Mhm.
All right. So he makes his way through the ship. He's like touching this funky controller thing, and then he finds the logic memory center. And then he like crawls in there, and he starts messing around with his like screwdriver or whatever, and he starts taking out Hal's brain parts. Now, what did you
Yeah.
think about that?
Um, I mean, what is there to think about? He's just like deactivating all the things of Hal.
Yeah.
And
Well, Hal starts singing like halfway through it or something.
oh
I
yeah, he's
thought that
being
was
all
pretty creepy.
creepy. Yeah, he's being all creepy. And then since they're getting close to Jupiter, this like video, this like automatic video was playing in the room for whatever reason, even though I'm assuming they wouldn't be back there regularly. I
Yeah.
don't,
What does the video say?
I don't remember.
All right. Well, I do remember. So the video is actually, you know that one guy who kept secrets that I said we were gonna bring up again, the one like
Yeah.
higher up. So he sent these astronauts on this HAL controlled ship to Jupiter to basically check out another one of those giant monolith things.
Yeah, the black rod things.
And so the reason they weren't allowed, well, actually, I don't even remember why the reason they weren't allowed to know. But they weren't allowed to know, which messed up with Hal's circuits because Hal was told that he is to be 100% truthful with the crew at all times. Now, the higher up said you can't tell the crews why you're going to Jupiter. And that's the thing that made Hal all freaky and messed up and made him psychopathic. Now, we're kind of short on time, so let's summarize the rest of it fairly quickly.
All right. Well, the main character. Oh wait, and like Hal also killed all the other crew members. Did we say that?
Yeah, I think we did.
Okay. So it's just the one guy who ended up taking out Hal, and then he ends up like tripping on like I don't know. Like they were just close to Jupiter. He started tripping, having seizures, and then you could just see all these like colorful things.
Yeah,
that look
sideways
like
guitar
Guitar
hero,
Hero.
vertical guitar hero, all that kind of crazy stuff.
Yeah, freaking like Comet, all sorts of just weird random stuff.
And
then
then he
you like
sees like
see
old versions of himself, right?
yeah, that's after he's like done tripping. He like sees like the ocean, but it's green and stuff.
That's weird.
And then he's like in this very, I don't know what the word is. Maybe like, I don't know, like an old timey like 1800s house or something. It's like kind of fancy looking.
Yeah?
He's just like done tripping inside of his pod. He sees like an older version of himself, and then he becomes that older person. He's like walking around, and then he sees an even older version of himself. Then he becomes that older version, and like so on. And so he gets like super old, and he's like in his bed.
And then he becomes a space baby, right?
Yeah, he just turns into this glowing, obviously fake baby that they made. I don't know what the idea was behind that.
This thing is
It
so
was a little
stupid.
creepy looking. It was a little creepy looking.
Yeah, and that's how the movie ends.
Yeah, he's just a glowing baby.
Now, one thing I do want to cover about this movie before we finish is Wall-E, a movie that takes a lot of plot beats, or at least a lot of similarity from it. I think that Wall-E took the villain and a lot of other types of inspiration from this movie. What do you think did it better? Wall-E with Otto, the self-driving ship, or Hal in this movie?
I'd say Wall-E. I really liked Wall-E. That was when Disney was in its peak era, you know.
Yeah, I feel like Hal, although he killed a whole bunch of people, wasn't really a villain, more of he was just a malfunctioning part. And Otto
Yeah,
seemed like an actual threat all the time.
yeah.
Maybe
He was
that's
like,
just because I love like the Lovebird robots and they make me cry. But I don't know.
yeah, it's a great movie. And Otto, like, even though the humans had like found life on the planet, he still decided to just ignore those and like keep them fat and happy on the ship and stuff. And they had to beat him. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Any final thoughts?
Um, definitely not the greatest film I've watched. It music though, as we were saying, is really good and it's used in a lot of other like sources of like media, like ads, other films. But the movie itself, not my cup of tea, and I don't really think anyone like around our age or even like our parents, like millennials or whatever generation they are, would really care for it either.
That's very true. I agree. I didn't get very much out of this movie in terms of like a moral or anything like that. I thought it was just pure artistic bleh, and that bleh was very underwhelming.
Mhm.
All right, this has been Donnie and Chris with a 2001 Space Odyssey review. Thank you.
Thanks.